Hi everyone, welcome to Tom's Man Shed. Okay, so I finally got around to doing this. I know there's at least one person who's been looking forward to this review, and it's on the actual telescopes in the observatory behind me. If you checked out my other two videos, the birth of the man shed, the original man shed which contained the observatory behind me 12 years ago or so, and then the continuation, the extension which I built last year, that's in two previous videos. But in this one, as promised, I'm going to take you around the telescopes, give you a quick description of each one, just show you the mount moving and things like that, and then we'll go in a separate video another time. We'll go into an actual imaging session on how I align the telescope at night, how the camera's attached to the computer, what software I use to control it all, and we'll go through like a live imaging session, taking a picture of a distant galaxy or something like that. Nights aren't drawing in quite early enough yet. It's still just second week in September. But give it another couple of months and the nights will be it'll be pretty dark pretty early on, and I'll be able to do that. So like I said, this is just a sort of a quick introduction to the scopes and a quick description of each one, and we'll start that and a quick description of each one, and then we'll go through that imaging at a later date. So without further ado, let's go into the observatory and have a look at them. Okay, so this is the door into the observatory. That's the rest of the shed, and here's the door into the observatory. 3 mortise locks on it. So I've got a red light for when you're observing at night time. If you need the light on, you put the red light on. That doesn't affect your night vision. And we've got this fluorescent light. If you don't, I use this because I do mainly astrophotography. I use the fluorescent light because it doesn't matter too much about my night vision getting affected. This flickering you're seeing on screen is just the camera picking it up. Right, then now the roof, first of all, the roof is held with each side of two locks, and then the whole roof slides open. I'm trying to do this with one hand. And then move around to the other side. I use this stick, makes things easier, or I can stand on some steps. So I'll shove it back to there. It'll go a bit further back, but that's plenty to show you this. And as you can see, the roof is now opened. Hopefully a bright day. So, where do we start? Right, first of all, here's the mount. The main telescope, or the biggest, not the main telescope, but the biggest telescope is this one, the Schmidt Cassegrain Celestron C925. This thing I'm taking off is the dew shield. All that is like an extension tube lined with felt that stops the telescope, or helps stop it dewing up, misting over here on this lens. Because this sheet of glass is at a different temperature than the surrounding air, you will get condensation on it, and that dew tube sort of traps a pocket of air at the same temperature, and it helps a massive amount to stop it misting up. The other things you use to stop the misting up are these things called juice straps. Now these are plugged into a 12 volt power supply up there, and you can control them with this. I can plug 4 juice strips into this heater control, and that sets it from like different temperatures. I usually have that pretty much all the way around. They don't get sizzling red hot, they just get warm, just enough to keep this area free of condensation. So that's your dew heaters. Like I said, this is the main Schmidt Cassegrain telescope. Now it's short and stubby like this because you'll see here the focal length of 2,350 millimeters, so 2.3 meters. So that's how long this telescope would be if it was just acting like a normal refractor telescope like this. But because it's got mirrors and lenses in, they bounce the light around, and the way it works is that the light comes through this first lens called the corrector lens, and that goes round right back to that mirror at the back there. You can see that's a mirror, and that's like a convex mirror that is that then focuses the light onto this one here called a secondary mirror, and that secondary mirror then sends it down that tube through a hole in the back of that mirror to the eyepiece, which is located there in here, and you focus it by turning this knob here, which moves that whole back mirror backwards and forwards. Now eventually I will get a focuser that goes on the back of this. At the moment that is just fixed, and that's how I would focus it. But moving the mirror, although there's hardly any mirror slap on these scopes, can sort of move the mirror around a bit. What you're best doing is getting it roughly in focus with that, and then you can get it very fine focus with a different Crayford type focuser which goes on there. I had them on my other scopes and I quite like that method. Some people don't like using them, they prefer this, and they put a precision 2-speed focuser here. But I think that's, you know, for what they are, the price of just a focuser to go there to replace that to get 2 speeds, it's still moving the mirror. I prefer this method, but that's a personal choice. Now, like I said, at the moment it's set up for visual use with an eyepiece in it, and this piece here is called a diagonal. All that is a mirror that bounces the image 90 degrees, which makes it much more convenient to look through. So you can twist the diagonal to a much easier angle than trying to stare down the back. When you're using astrophotography, your camera will mount straight on the back of that. Now the camera I use is this one. This is the camera, a QHY 163. You can see, to get into the light, you can see the sensor in there. So basically it works the same as a normal conventional camera, but the thing about Astro cameras, these, is they have cooling in them. The reason for the cooling is that as a camera chip heats up, you get noise on it, like speckles. When you're using it in a normal camera, that doesn't matter, because it's only open for like 1,000th of a second or a 500th of a second, so it doesn't get that hot. But when you're doing astrophotography and you've got the shutter open 15 minutes, it builds up quite a lot of heat, and if you don't cool it, it's a much noisier picture. So you can set the cooling on that through the software. I'll be doing that in another video later. And you can cool the camera down to like minus, I think it's like minus 30 degrees, minus 25, minus 30 degrees Celsius below the ambient temperature. So if you're doing it on astrophotographing on a warm summer's night of say 20 degrees, 25 degrees, you can get it to below zero at the chip. There's also a heater in that camera that stops that chip icing up. My previous camera didn't have that facility. You couldn't set the temperature, it was just all or nothing. It didn't have the heater at the front, and you did get some icing on the chip, so you had to wrap a dew band around it. That is all controlled in this camera. So that's basically this telescope. Now that scope is used mainly for planetary work, so bright objects like the planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and the Moon, of course. For deep sky objects you want a wider field. This is quite a narrow field, with it being a long focal length like that. It's quite a narrow field of view. So that's the ideal telescope for planets. And if you want to know what this particular scope is capable of, Celestron 9.25. 9.25, by the way, is the diameter of the front. So across there is 9.25 inches. Just look up Damien Peach. I'll put a link on screen and just check out some of the pictures of Jupiter and Saturn and planets that Damien Peach has obtained with a scope the same as this, and they're just unbelievable. Okay, so that's that scope. Now the one that's attached to it here is a William Optics Megrez 72. Now this is just 72 millimeters across there. The bigger that, that's called the objective lens, the bigger that, the more light you will let in, and the easier you'll be able to see some dimmer objects. And this has been a refractor. There's no mirrors in that. The light just comes straight through the lenses. It's a much wider field of view. And that is, I can't remember what the focal length of that is. Again, I'll put it on screen in the video. But this is what you call a doublet. It's an apochromat, and so it's an apo telescope, and it's a doublet. That means there's two cluster of two lenses here that help eliminate some of the coloured banding you get around bright objects. If you look through a really cheap telescope or pair of binoculars at the moon or a bright object, on the rim you will see usually like a blue and a yellow band, and that's what you call chromatic aberration, and that's because all the colours aren't being brought to the same focus. What a doublet does is try to bring them more to a focus. It's not as good as a triplet, which that one is, and I'll explain that in a minute, but it's much better than just an acro telescope, and it does eliminate a lot of that blue fringing, and the view from that is pretty good. The focuser is nice and smooth. That's one speed, and then the little gold knob is like a fine adjustment. You move that like, so that's a tenth. That one turn of that, you'd have to turn that 10 times to equal one turn of the big knobs there. And again, you've got your diagonal here. You can twist round to any angle, put your eyepiece in. I would use that probably as a guide scope when using the Celestron C8. So, further up we go. This one is probably the scope I use the most. This long white one here. Now that's an Altair Astro 102. So this diameter of this lens here is 102 millimeters, as opposed to the 72 of the William Optics. This again is a dew shield, as is this. You can see this slide up and down, and again that helps stop dew forming, but again there's a dew band around here that gets warm and stops that. Now this telescope is what you call a triplet. There are 3 sets of lenses in here. Obviously increases the price, but it almost, well, as near as damn it, totally eliminates any chromatic aberration, any colour fringing whatsoever. So you can take photos of reasonably sort of bright objects like the Pleiades, and you don't get any blue halos around the stars as you would with using a doublet. So it's even more colour accurate, if you will, than a doublet. Now also in here I've got a flattener. This thing here is a flattener. What that does is stars towards the edge of the field of view do appear a bit elongated. It's called coma. I'll show you a picture of it here. So you can see in this picture that the stars towards the edge of the view are elongated, and what a flattener does is it makes them nice and round again. So in this picture you can see them stars are corrected near the edge and they're a lot rounder, and that's what this flattener does. You don't have to have that in, but it just makes it a bit more accurate in looks. Now this is the guide scope for when I'm imaging through this. So if you were just looking through it, just visual, you would have an eyepiece in here as well as an eyepiece in there, and it's a lot easier to find constellations and objects through a smaller magnification thing like that with a wider field of view than the scope itself. But what this thing is, this blue thing, is a guide scope. So again, it's a QHY, the same make as the main camera, and that connects to your computer software, and you use a guide program like PhD, and that basically tracks the stars and gives minute corrections to the mount to keep a star bang in the centre of the field of view. Now your mount is pretty accurate anyway. You can sort of like leave it on an object, on a star, on a galaxy, a nebula or whatever, go away, and in an hour later come back, look through the telescope, it's still there in the field of view. That's fine for visual work, but it will have moved images. And in photographic work, where, like I say, your shutter is open for say 15 minutes, that will show as a smeared image. So you need that image to be absolutely bang on the same spot, to stay on the same spot. So like I said, what that does, that guide camera through here, you click on a star. Again, I'll be showing all this on how the software works. You click on a star and that locks it on there, and then whenever there's any sort of movement, it drifts off an absolute midges, a pixel or whatever, it sends a signal to the mount to say, hey, move me back, and it keeps it absolutely spot on for an indefinite amount of time, 3 hours or whatever of an imaging session. And finally on the scopes, there's this thing here. This is called a Telrad. Now I find it easier. Sorry about this plane flying over. I find it a lot easier than trying to look through a spotting scope like this. what this does, there's no magnification involved, and it's like a bit like a head-up display in a car, or equate it to. Via this lens and this piece of glass, it projects a red circle on the sky, and you just look through it with your naked eye. You can adjust the intensity of that circle with this little dial here, turn it on and off, and that just puts a red circle on exactly where the telescope is pointing. You put that on, you line it up perfectly with these adjustment screws at the back, and so that if that red circle is round a particular object, well, that's where this scope will be looking. And if you line them all up together and they're all pointing in exactly the same direction via these mounts, you'll find all of your scopes are looking there. So I think that just about covers the 3 scopes. But the most important part in any observatory, well, they're all important bits, you couldn't use them without each other, but is this thing, the mount. A lot of people make the mistake, they go and get a fantastic telescope, biggest they can get, and don't think about the mount. Put it on some wobbly tripod or a mounting capable of supporting the weight or whatever, and then they're stuck with something unusual because it's vibrating around too much. But what this does is, first of all, if you look back in any of the other videos, the birth of Tom's Man Shed, part 1 and 2, it shows you the construction of this. This is basically solid concrete with an iron girder down the middle, and then I made this platform here, and you can see how big the bolts are. Absolutely massive. You can get things dead level with that. And if it's permanently mounted in an observatory like this, what you do is you polar align it, so this mount is exactly pointing up there at the celestial North Pole, which is quite near the pole star. It's not bang on. If you point it at the pole star itself, that isn't bang on celestial north. But again, there are methods and software to do that, to get your polar accuracy bang on. And once it is bang on pointed at the pole, that's the best way to set it up. You've got perfect alignment, and then when you do your star alignment to telescope where to point, it's spot on each time. Now this mount, it's called a Mesu 200. It's made by a guy in Holland, the Netherlands, called Lucas Mesu, and it's capable of carrying 100 kilograms in weight. Now that is a massive amount for most telescope mounts. Most sort of like, should have said domestic telescope mounts that the hobbyist uses, the non-commercial mounts, don't hold anything like that amount of weight. That's like a total weight including the counterweights here. But what have we got? We've got, I mentioned them weights in another video as well, but we've got 5 kilogram, 2.5 to 5, 7, 8, something like about 12 kilograms of weight there, balancing about, I think there's probably, all them scopes together, all equipment, maybe about 25 to 30 maximum kilograms of weight. So well within its capabilities, and it's roller driven. A lot of telescopes have are driven by a tooth belt or gears, and with gears you can get what you call backlash. When the scope starts moving one way and then the other way, between the teeth between, no matter how brilliantly they're machined, and they are brilliantly machined, you will get a tiny bit of backlash. You don't get that on a roller drive. It's a friction roller in there that rolls on the edge of the whole drum, and there's absolutely no backlash whatsoever. Brilliantly made. Still making them now. They've just brought out a new one, and it's controlled with this thing here, which is made by Sidereal Technology, Servo Controller 2, a company called Cytec. Now, they are brilliant, Cytec, at responding to emails. If you have any questions for them, because this can be fitted, this is a totally different company that Lucas Mesu used for his mount, but it can be fitted to loads of different mounts. It's not the easiest thing to understand in the menus. There are lots and lots of menus, and it's not the best sort of like user interface to make it easy to understand, but it does a vast amount. I think it's knocking on for £1,000. Might be mistaken. I'll put the exact price on screen just for this. And this is what connects to all your motors and your encoders and everything, that tells it where to go on the position and basically the brains of it all. But like I say, if you do have any questions, the guys at Cytec, I'm in the UK, I've emailed them in the States, they've responded sometimes within an hour to the email with the right answer. They are really on the ball. And that's all together. When you get your scope, it's all set up for it. Lucas sets all the parameters up perfectly and everything. So basically, it's just a matter of getting your head around the software and how to use it. Now, one thing I will say, Lucas Mesu gave the best customer service you could ever wish for in any product. I'll go on face to face now and I'll tell you the exact story, what happened with just one batch of these scopes and how Lucas sorted it out. So this is the story of the fantastic after sales that Lucas Mesu gave his customers about probably 6, maybe 7 years ago now, something like that. So what happened was, I first bought them out when they first came out, which was about then 6-7 years ago, I think. And it was great, it worked fantastic and everything, but one or two of us online, on the forums, like Cloudy Nights and that, we're getting a few weird things happening in our tracking graphs. There was some strange peaks shown at certain times, and it didn't seem to be guiding as it should. And there was a lot of discussion, and eventually Lucas Mesu, the guy who makes the mounts, found out it was down to the motor and encoders that it was using at that current batch. The previous batch had been fine. This was probably only sort of like the second or third batch, and he'd just gone to these motors and encoders because they looked a lot neater, as you saw in when I was in the observatory just now. It's a sort of a neater design, and he was assured by the manufacturers that the resolution was as spec'd and everything. Turned out it wasn't. They weren't fit for purpose really for this mount, doing what they were supposed to do. They weren't accurate enough, or the encoders weren't right. I don't know exactly the ins and outs of it, but it turns out that that was the problem. So what he did was he found out everyone that was affected in that batch throughout Europe, and he flew out from Holland, him and his wife flew out to each of our houses and retrofitted the original accurate motor, and then set up on the computer all the parameters till it was perfect. And he gave you an appointment, asked when it was convenient to come. I said any time you like, I can be home at any time. Sure enough, he turned up bang on time. Forget what it was, like a Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock or something like that. Spent about an hour and a half taking the old motor out, putting the new one in, checking it all, setting it all up. English isn't his first language, and his wife spoke hardly any at all, but we managed to sort of like converse. Made him a brew and some biscuits and stuff like that, and he did that, and as an apology, like I say, he gave us all that polar scope, which was worth over 100 quid. He then went on to the next. I think he had, on that one day, he had about 3 to get to. So he stopped in a hotel nearby, drove to one, sorted him out, drove to me. I think his next one was I'm in Thornton Gleebles near Blackpool. His next one was Newcastle, something like that. Drove to them, booked another hotel for the night, and did the same the day after. Sorted everybody out. It tracked perfectly after that. All the problems were sorted. He then flew home. So how's that for customer service? I've never come across that where a manufacturer will actually fly out to the customer's houses, all at his own expense, put them right, and give you £100 gift as an apology. Fantastic service. So I would definitely recommend this mount. It's proved totally accurate, totally reliable. It's not the prettiest mount, it looks a bit industrial, some people like that, but there are some extremely sexy looking anodized red, gorgeous looking mounts. But I'm happy with this, and the capability of carrying 100 kilograms in weight, that includes your counterweights, is far in excess of most others. It's like at least triple what most domestic mounts can take. So yeah, so I just thought I'd do a head-to-head on that customer service from Lucas. So back in the observatory now to carry on with the tour. The problem with the graph, the tracking graph, it was all on the right ascension side. This never really came into it, so that could stay. There was no need to swap that, but he did swap that back from one of them back to the original one of these, and since then the tracking has been absolutely perfect. So I think I've covered that, and that's the polar scope he gave me for me trouble. They're worth about £100, and that's what helps you line it up and polar align it through there. I can't show you, but through that it's marked with the positions of, probably just about see it, the positions of certain stars. I wonder if I can get it. Oh, caught a glimpse there. And various procedures you can line it up, but I've since used a different method. I now use this, which is a way of doing it all a lot easier. No real need when it's mounted in an observatory, because once it's there, it's done for good. But I had to have it because I love my gadgets, and it's a brilliant way of polar aligning a scope. So I think I've just about covered everything. It's all powered through this power supply, Macklin's DC power supply. I forget how many. 5 amp continuous, 7 amp, so it's plenty of power output for what I need. And these are all the USB leads leading back behind there through to the PC to control them. So I've got all the leads, like that. This is a monitor. I can duplicate the screen of the other telescope, and that's helpful for when you're focusing. Now, one thing I did forget to show you was this, which is a focusing aid called a Bartinoff mask. And what you do, again, I'll show you this in action when we do an actual imaging session. but it's quite difficult getting your telescope on absolute focus, pinpoint accuracy focus. With this, the way these slots are cut in it, it projects a cross on the screen with another line going through that cross, and you just move your focuser around until that line exactly intersects the cross. Bit hard to describe. I'll put a picture up on screen to show you what I mean by that. As you can see in this picture, where on the left there where it says inside focus, you'll notice that line, the vertical line, is a bit to the left of where the two other lines cross. The perfect focus, you can see it's bang in the middle, and then if you go past perfect focus, carry on turning the knob in the same direction, the line will move over to the other side. So it's basically just move your focus knob around until that line bang on bisects the two other lines, as in the centre picture. I remember this actual method coming out, being discussed live on the forums, the Cloudy Night forums and that, and this guy coming up with this method of doing it. Before that, it was like you put a similar sort of mask in front of your lens with 3 holes in it, and you tried to get these 3 holes to align, but it was nothing like as accurate as this. With this method, you can get it absolutely bob on, and since then it's taken off and become a real big success. So you just put one of them in front of whatever telescope you're using to do your imaging on, and move your telescope to a bright star, focus on that, then move back to your object that you're going to be imaging, and you know, you've got it bang on in focus. It's a really, really handy accessory to have. So there we go, the Megrez 72 uses a sort of like a super wide angle, because you need the wider angle to get some galaxies in. Some galaxies are huge and don't even fit within the confines of that. You're better off taking them with just a straight camera lens, hardly any magnification, 2 or 3 times magnification. Something, because everybody says what sort of magnification has it got? Well, you do the magnification. The way you work that out is you divide the focal length of the eyepiece into the focal length of the telescope. So this is the eyepiece box. Various sizes of eyepiece and filters. That's the camera I use for planetary and lunar work. Again, slightly different method of astrophotography when you're taking pictures of the planets or deep sky objects like galaxies. Deep sky objects like galaxies and nebulas are very, very dim. So you need a camera, like I pointed out before, that and you take very slow exposures, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes long, and then you stack them together to form a final image. Now, with the moon and the planets, they are much, much brighter. So what you do for them, you don't need long images, you need like very, very short images. So what you do, basically, this is like a webcam, if you will, just a high quality webcam, and it takes hundreds or thousands of frames per second. So you take a short video sequence, say a 2-minute long video sequence, comprising of, say, a total of 2,000 little pictures, and then you use software to pick the best ones of them and to filter out turbulence and stuff like that. It's a different way of astrophotography, like I say, for planets compared to very dim deep sky objects like galaxies. Now the eyepieces, I mean, there's ones like this which are a 2-inch diameter there at the end, let loads of light in, weigh quite a bit. It weighs quite a bit, does this. As you can see, it's a hefty lump. And their focal length there, that one is 23 millimeters. So the way you work out magnification is you divide the focal length of the telescope, if you remember, on the Celestron. There's the focal length of the telescope, 2,350 millimeters. If you divide that by the focal length of the eyepiece, you get your magnification. So for something like that, the 2,350 millimeters divided by 23 for the, if I was using an eyepiece in the Celestron, that'd give a magnification of 102. If I was to use that in this one, the Altair 102, now that's got a focal length of 715. So 715 divided by 23 is just a magnification of 31. And again, if I was using it in the small Megrez 32, that's only a focal length of 432. So that divided by 23 would be 18. Magnification of only 18. So as you can see, the lower the number on your eyepiece, the higher its magnification. Now there's also another very useful eyepiece, and that's these. So this, again, is a very good make, Teleview. This is a power mate, which is 2.5 times the power of the eyepiece plugged into it. That's 1.25 inches diameter, and this one is 1.6 times. Now these are called Barlow lenses. So if you have this, say 1.6, every lens that you put into that, again you multiply by 1.6. So it gives you 2. If it was a 2 times Barlow, it'd effectively double the magnification that you were getting. So if it's just about one of them and a full set of eyepieces, you've basically got 2 full sets of eyepieces. These are a couple of filters. That's a very, very old version of that, if you will. Again, this is a flattener and a reducer. So it will reduce the focal length, so I can put that on the end of the scope. On this end of the scope is mainly for the Megrez one, and that will reduce its focal length and flatten the image as well. So like I said, that's the eyepiece set, but I don't tend to do much eyepiece visual photography. So I'll show you the telescope in use, just give you an idea of how quick. Well, we just take these little stops out. You'll then turn it on. Well, just to give you an idea. Sorry about my camera, but I'm trying to do this one-handed. So that's it moving in elevation. And again, if we bring it back, and you can do that all automatically. You can press like a park, what you call a park position, at the end of a session of imaging, and it would automatically go back to that part position where you started off from. Yeah, one thing that is very, very important is that you balance your mount perfectly. What that means is, this is unusual being a roller driven mount. Most mounts are gear driven or belt driven, and with them you have a clutch, you have removable clutches that you can move, so you can move the mount around really easy by hand, just as easy as pushing it with your little finger. So you can move it quickly from place to place, and then you can tighten the clutches up when it's in use. Well, this being a roller driven one, you can't do that. The rollers are on all the time, so even when the mount is turned off, and it's turned off now at the main switch, the roller is still pressing against the main circles, the rings that it presses against. So there is a certain amount of friction even when the scope is turned off. If this was turned on now and I tried to move it like this, I would find it really hard, because I'd be fighting against the motors which are trying to keep it in position. So what you do is, it's got to stay wherever you put it in all positions. So as I pull this down, and you do it in the configuration where you will be using it. So the dew shield is now on, as you can see. That plastic extension piece is now on the scope, because that adds some weight. You would normally do it with the camera in place, but this diagonal and eyepiece weigh roughly the same as the camera, so it'll be about the same. And as you can see, wherever I pull it and let go, it stays there. So I can push it right round and it's staying put. Let go, no movement. No movement. As I pull down on this, the same. No movement. No movement. You can see the scopes now are almost vertical, and that's where they're staying. So no matter where you push it, the mount isn't fighting against weight, and it's not putting any undue strain on them motors. If it was too nose heavy or too tail heavy or whatever, and tending to sort of like drift around here or whatever, it would be putting your motors under a bit more of a strain, and like I said, there would be one direction it'd be easy for them, the other direction it'd be very, very hard. So that's about it. One of the major concerns is keeping the wires out of the way. On the latest Mesu, I believe that and some other mounts, they have a central post that you can put all your wires down. That causes a lot. That saves a lot of headaches, because I've tried to do it as best I can. Most of the leads are coiled up and attached to the mount, but the ones that have to remain where they are, you have to watch they don't get tangled around wherever the scope moves. So at the end of the imaging session, you would normally hit the park button on the software, and that would motor it back automatically to this position, and then get it exactly in line and engage the little peg. And again with this one, let's see, get the peg engaged, push it in, and that's the mount now locked in position. And then you would close the roof and pack up for the night. Okay, so I think that's about everything. Old-fashioned temperature gauge. You can see it's at the moment in here, just over 25, 26. That's a little transmitter above, and that transmits the signal to here, giving you the temperature. According to this, it's 23 in this room. So I think that's about everything I've showed you. There are a couple of other sort of little things to show you, like there's this, which is an LED background light for when you're sketching and tracing. But what I use this for is it goes over the lens like that, the front of the scope, and it gives an evenly illuminated light, and you use that in astrophotography. Like I say, it tends to get quite complicated, but as well as taking pictures of the actual object you're taking, like the galaxy or the nebula or whatever, you will pick up bits of noise from the camera's chip. Even though it's cooled, you will still pick up bits of noise from the camera's chip, and any bits of dust and stuff that have collected on any of the pieces of glass or the lenses and the mirror in the scope can show up as like little donuts on the image. So what you do, you take a series of shots called darks and biases and flats. Now you're probably better off looking up the words darks and flats and biases on Google and looking exactly, because they'll explain it a lot better than I can. But basically, a bias shot you would take at the minimum exposure you can, so thousandths of a second, with the lens cap on the telescope. So you're basically just taking a picture of darkness, of just nothing, of the camera chip at its minimum exposure time, and that will pick up a certain amount of noise. You then take a series of pictures called darks, which you take again with the lens cap on the camera, so in total darkness, of the same length of exposure as your main shots that you're taking the galaxy or nebula with. So say you're taking a picture of the Orion Nebula and you're using 5-minute long exposures. What you would do is take a series of 5-minute long exposures, and then at the same temperature, so while your camera's on and at the same temperature, you'd cover the lens cap up and take a series of 5-minute long exposures at that temperature, and they're called darks, and that picks up differing amount of noise that's in the picture relating to the temperature and the exposure time. And you then take a set of what you call flats. For flats, you would put a uniform light source over the front of the scope. So say point it vertically up, put that illuminated panel, or you could point it at a piece of evenly illuminated blue sky in daylight and cover this with, say, a piece of white sheet. What you're trying to get is an evenly illuminated, over the whole area, light. And then you would take pictures again, just of a second, half a second exposure, something like that, enough to show up them dust globules on that picture. And then what you do, once you've got all these 3 sets of biases and darks and lights, you use the software and you put them all in, and it subtracts it from the final photograph. So from your final photograph, you've taken out as much noise as you can and as much dust spots as you can, leaving you with a much cleaner image. That image, after you've stacked them all up, is then taken into Photoshop, and then you can spend hours and hours and hours manipulating it in Photoshop. Again, Google all that astrophotography and see how much it involves. So you can see when you see these beautiful pictures of the Orion Nebula in all its full glory and all its purples and reds and browns, that isn't just a quick picture. And again, people expect to see that through the eyepiece. What you'll see through the eyepiece in most instances is just a fuzzy blob. You know, most people are quite underwhelmed when they look through the eyepiece. They love it at the moon and the planets and things, but when you show them a certain galaxy or whatever, they usually say, "Oh, it's had it. I can only just see it. Just looks like a fuzzy blob." Well, basically, that's what it does to the eye. You don't see the colour at all. Just a white fuzzy blob. That's why I like astrophotography. You can tease all these details out, knowing that you've got them there in your picture, and you've done it with your own skills. So basically, that is it. So the roof is there open. It's just a matter now of sliding it shut, locking it with the two locks, so nobody could get in from the outside. And that's it. I'm sure there'll be something I've forgotten. So there is, I'll add it at the end. That's the hand controller for the telescope. It's basically just an up, down, left and right. If you were just doing a visual session, you don't need to go through all your computer. You just move it around yourself to wherever you want. These extension leads, they do sometimes need to be powered. If you just plug it in a normal extension lead, you can find it doesn't get enough power, so these have to be like an amplified cable, like that one is, and this one. And that is basically it. One final look around. I think you've seen everything you need to see. These are controls when you're setting the mount up and getting it perfectly polar aligned to get it left and right and up and down, and once it's in line, that is it, that is then locked. So if you're lucky enough to have an observatory, it's great. If you're having to rig up your telescope every night, it can be a bit of a pain. I forgot to mention the side-by-side mount. This thing here, where the two telescopes in, that's by a company called ADM. They're made in America, really well machined. And this size of mount here is called a Losmandy mount. There is a much slimmer mount called a Vixen, and that's that size. So you can see the difference. And on a big hefty scope like this, you're much better with a Losmandy mount. It will grip it a lot better than a Vixen mount. That is the Vixen mount there. You can see much smaller to go in there, but it's only holding a small telescope, so that's fine. By the way, there the vents in the floor, very important. Again, take a look at the other video, the construction of this observatory, the part 1, and I go into in detail why those vents are very important. So if you're thinking of building an observatory, take a look at that and don't make the same mistake I did. Okay, so there you have it. That's a rundown of the scopes and the mount. Like I say, I will be doing another video later in the year, once the night's drawing, on a full imaging session, so you'll see them in action and the software I use for doing that. I'm happy with them 3 scopes now for a while. As with most people into astronomy, we're constantly buying and selling different telescopes. I've tried all sorts. I started out with a Meade 12-inch LX200 on a fork mount. Again, you'll see that in the other video up here, where I'm building the observatory. Wasn't a great telescope, but not really happy with it for photography, so went on to a Losmandy mount after that. Had a fair few scopes. Had a Celestron 8-inch, same as the one I've got now, but the size smaller, the 8-inch. I like that, and I swapped it for a Ritchie Crescent design from Altair Astros, made by GSO. Lovely looking scope, all carbon fibre, no corrector plate at the front to mess up or anything, but I never really got to grips with it. Collimation isn't as easy. There's a tilt plate at the back that you need to get bang on, as well as the primary mirror is fixed, and the secondary moves. I did all the proper collimation stuff with a Howie Glatter laser collimator and everything. Never totally satisfied with it, so I did like the C8, so I started looking for either a C925 or a C11, and after looking for ages on Astro Apps and them being right down south and things like that, I finally, a couple of months ago, got this Celestron C925. So I haven't actually used it yet, but I know I'll be happy with it. I know the results it can get, and I have used a C8. So I'm looking forward to trying that out once the night's drawing. I just mentioned UK Astro Apps. If you are buying or selling telescopes, I would very much recommend that as a great site to do it on. Again, I'll give a link up here to where it is. It's called UK Astro Apps. All it is you put your advert on and the price and your contact details, and then it's up to somebody to ring you up and you sort it out between yourselves. It's not like eBay where you put it on and they charge you for the advert and the final price or anything like that. It's just basically a means of putting for sale, telescopes for sale or telescopes wanted up there. But it's a great place to look if you're after a telescope. And all the people on it, or 99% of the people on it, are genuine astronomers who do a deal. There's loads of scams on eBay. I've stopped selling on eBay now due to the way they treat sellers, but that's another story. But yeah, UK Astro Apps. I've bought nearly all my telescope stuff and sold tons and tons on that site as well. So there you have it. Hope you liked the scopes and a brief explanation of each. Keep tuned in, subscribe if you can, give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Any questions you've got about anything, please ask and I'll try and answer them. And like I say, keep an eye out for that where I film sort of like a whole imaging session from beginning to end. Okay, I'll see you for that and other reviews along the way. Hope to catch you all again soon. Bye for now.